Okay, welcome to the second video in this series of literary archetypes. If you haven't already, go back and check the first, which is a video on character archetypes. So this time around, we're going to be looking at situational archetypes. So situational archetypes, me. So before we go on, again, take a second, reflect. What situations in stories have you seen repeated again and again and again? You can think of any. Think about movies, TV shows, comic books, novels, music, whatever. Take a couple seconds. Alright, so the first situational archetype, and maybe one of the most common, is the journey situational archetype. This is when the hero is in search of some kind of truth, some piece of information, or an object or a thing that's necessary to bring peace back to their homeland. So I'm sure you've seen many times that a hero's city or town has been destroyed or taken over by enemy forces, and the hero has to leave that village or town, come back with some type of knowledge or some type of weapon or tool to help them defeat the villains. All right, and along this journey, the hero usually goes on a series of quests or mini quests where they have to fight or defeat smaller foes or enemies and face other little small trials along the way to test them and to help them grow into a stronger hero. And usually they descend into some real psychological hell and faces their real fears. So when we look at the hero's journey, you'll see that most characters enter some type of underworld where they have to face their greatest fear and overcome it to return and defeat whatever forces are ruining their homeland. So here we have the example of the Wizard of Oz, classic example. But there's a ton of other too. Lord of the Rings, there's many examples from the Bible of characters going on journeys. Moana, many examples from literature and a variety of different texts. Alright, so next we have the fall. This is when characters start out at the beginning of the story living a really great life. Maybe they are really wealthy, maybe they're very popular, they have it made essentially at the beginning of the story. But something happens early on that sends them out of this life, and it kicks them out, and it kind of takes them down a couple pegs, and they fall from their Next example is death and rebirth. This situational archetype usually goes hand in hand with the Christ figure character archetype, as I'm sure you can guess. The death and birth situational archetype is one of the most common. It usually refers to situations when someone or something dies and they're accompanied by some sign of rebirth. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that they actually die and they're resurrected. Sometimes it just appears that they die, or sometimes they die to their old selves and they're reborn as a new person, meaning that they've learned something new and they've really changed as a person and they've changed their ways. So examples of this: Beauty and the Beast, or Elsa and Anna from Frozen, E.T., Batman, but there's a ton of other mythological and biblical examples where this happens as well. Next situational archetype we'll look at is supernatural intervention. This just means that some supernatural or godlike being comes into the character's life and helps them out. Sometimes they help them out, sometimes they actually make things harder for the character. So obviously examples of the Bible, God helping Adam and Eve, God helping a number of his followers throughout the Bible, Macbeth with the three witches, We have The Lion King, where Mufasa's father comes and speaks to Mufasa and gives him guidance. Also through ancient epics like the Iliad and the Odyssey, gods literally come down to the earth and inhabit the bodies of some of the heroes and help them fight and perform in battle. So supernatural intervention is a very common one. So watch out for it when you're watching your movies or TV shows or reading your novels. Next one is nature versus technology. This is a big one, and we'll look at this further, but basically this is where technology and nature are pitted against one another. And it suggests that nature is good and technology somehow will have some negative consequences. So it's kind of a cautionary tale, or a story that gives people a warning not to progress too far with technology. A very, very early example of nature versus technology situational archetype is the story of Icarus. If you don't know the story, go check it out. But basically, Icarus develops wings made of wax, and he's warned not to fly too close to the sun. But obviously he does, and his wings melt, and he falls down to his death. So basically, the stories are stating that technology can lead to our downfall. So a lot of modern examples would be WALL-E, the Lorax, or Terminator. A very, very common one, very obvious, is the battle between good and evil. This is clear in almost every superhero movie, many movies that discuss morality. But basically, these situations pit obvious forces of good and evil against one another. And usually good triumphs over evil despite the great odds. So maybe at the beginning of the movie, it may seem as though evil is much stronger than the good, and there's no possible way that the good forces will ever rise up and defeat the evil. But somehow, usually through planning and development of knowledge and intellect, the character is able to rise up and defeat evil forces. So this is everywhere. You can see it in Disney movies like Monsters, Inc. You can see it in dystopian movies like The Hunger Games, Harry Potter, all of the Marvel franchise movies. This happens everywhere. Last one we're going to look at today is the belly of the beast. This is when a hero is swallowed or falls into an unknown dangerous place, or somehow stumbles or gets lost into an enemy lair, and it appears that they've died. So this one kind of goes hand in hand with the death and rebirth situational archetype. Here the enemy enters, or the hero enters the enemy headquarters, or they're eaten by a giant creature and they become lost in this really terrifying place, and they have to grow as a hero and figure a way out of this situation so that they can continue on with their quest. Alright, that's it for situational archetypes. Make sure you took really good notes and you finish all of the assignments before moving on to the third and final section of the literary archetypes unit. See you soon.